Hi there, everyone. This is Adam Schrager. I am the storyteller with the American Family Insurance Institute for Corporate and Social Impact. We invest in and partner with entrepreneurs and others looking to close equity gaps around America. We are part venture capital fund. We are part capacity builder based here in Madison, Wisconsin. Talking about community resilience today and renewable technologies and climate change, and wanted to welcome in two amazing people that we're excited to talk to and hear their thoughts on this topic. First is Jonathan Scott, who's an entrepreneur, the co-founder of Scott Brothers Global. It's a leading lifestyle and entertainment company. He's a New York Times bestseller list, reported recently a PBS special called Power Trip on solar energy and solar power, and he is a brand ambassador for American Family Insurance. Our other guest is Donnel Baird, who is the CEO of BlocPower, worked 3 years working on green buildings as a consultant in the Obama administration. BlocPower is a climate technology startup that's founded in and still based in Brooklyn, with a mission to make American cities greener and healthier. The company is currently electrifying mid-sized residential and commercial buildings in financially disadvantaged communities in more than 24 cities across the country. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here. Can I say I'd like to take you on the road as my hype man permanently?
Happy to go. Happy to go. I'll just tell my wife and kids. But as we sit here today, and probably, Jonathan, if you're at home in Nevada, you know this better than Donnel and I, who are in the Midwest and the East, respectively. I mean, half this country is facing record temperatures, heat domes, terminology that we've become used to, unfortunately, in this world. And I'm curious to know, with this climate, both literally and figuratively speaking, how does it affect kind of your thoughts and what you do as it relates to renewable technologies? And Jonathan, let me start with you, please.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things. The word climate had, all of a sudden had this stigma attached to it where, some of the population like, yeah, we have to do something about this. Some of the population think, well, this is just not a real thing. Well, now all that misinformation has been quashed and people realize this is actually affecting us, not only physically, but also fiscally, through things like natural disasters. In the last 3 years alone, there have been over $415 billion spent in trying to combat natural disasters. A lot of that hurricanes, wildfires, but those weather patterns are being exacerbated by increases in temperature and all of the drastic climate changes. You look at things like infrastructure with sea level rise. There are many cities and some in America that are affected by the most subtle increase in sea level rise. And again, that's costing billions and billions of dollars to counteract. When you see a lot of the shortages right now, they're looking at hydropower shortages that are going to affect costs for electricity in a lot of cities in America. Well, all of a sudden, those infrastructure changes that they have to do to combat that gets put back on the ratepayer, which means your rates continue to go up. So that's what we're trying to find a solution for. Is there a solution where we can combat how this is affecting the consumer at home and at the same time combat climate control, the climate crisis? And the good thing is there are technologies and there are companies already that are doing it successfully.
Talk about hype man pitch, Donnel. He set you up right there. Are you one of those companies that's trying to both combat climate as well as kind of empower consumers at the same time?
We're the only company that's doing that, Adam. I think that's right. I mean, I flew in from San Francisco yesterday, and I have family in LA, and one of the largest droughts on records. The wildfires this summer are projected to be far, far worse than the last 2 years when they were awful. I mean, whole towns burned down. One of our investors, home in Napa Valley, almost burned down, right? And it doesn't matter if you can hire a private firefighting force or not. I mean, climate change is here, and everyone, rich and poor alike, are losing everything. And so, Utah has one of the largest droughts in recorded American history that's occurring right now. And so totally agree with what Jonathan has said. I think the question for all of us is like, what are the things that we can do to come together and really embrace clean energy solutions that are better and faster and cheaper for regular Americans, so that when it's time for them to make a decision around what's next for their building or for their car, they're buying a new family vehicle or sending their kid to college or whatever, that cleaner solutions are a part of that. What are the things that we can do as business leaders to make it easier for customers across America to make decisions that are good for the climate? And we think that part of that is helping them understand that it's good for their wallet, right? We're not going to moralize or speechify, right? We're gonna introduce better products and services that are better than the fossil fuel alternatives, and that's how we win.
And so, for anyone who's followed this issue for years, Jonathan, you know this, the cost of solar now is far more reasonable than it ever was. Wind is far more reasonable than it ever was. So what's the impediment to providing consumers with this choice?
I think there has been a very long misinformation campaign that has targeted the renewable energy industry. And a lot of that was coming from the fossil fuel side. And now it used to be, actually, when I started the documentary, what was interesting is the messaging that I constantly got from a lot of the fossil fuel utilities and out to the public was that it's not good for business. Nobody's doing this. You can't actually reduce money. It doesn't make sense. Well, that is no longer the case. Every utility that I know is now in the solar generation business and the storage business and the wind business because it's good for business. You've seen over the years, the cost of the equipment has come down and the efficiency of the technology has increased, where a smaller surface area today can produce more solar energy, for example, than even 5 years ago, 4 years ago. So, getting the information from a valuable or a credible source is very important for people when they're looking at where technology is going. But even when I started the documentary, there were still over 20 coal power plants slated to be built in America. And coal is by far the dirtiest of all of the energy that can be produced. And it doesn't make sense because the most cost-effective energy to produce is wind, then solar, and then even natural gas is less dirty than coal. Well, by the end of my film, it took 3 years to film. Every single one of those projects has now been abandoned or shut down because they realize it is better for them to look at these other sources of business. So the way I approach it, and I apologize, I could go on for hours. We could make this a 16-part segment and answer. But
let's do it. Part one of 16.
Boom. I think there are two things that I look at. That are a concern for me. I want, what is good for the individual and what is good for the environment. Well, when you look at something like utility scale solar is very important because it has a huge impact on the environment. It's good for the environment. And there are a lot of workers that work in utility scale solar. However, that doesn't necessarily bring down the cost for the individual at home. So that's why I love rooftop solar. I love community solar. I love giving access to people who didn't think they could benefit from solar and reducing their bills. So what's good for people? Human health, reducing fossil fuel and carbon emissions, and then also what's good for their wallet. So those are the two things I always look at when I'm focused on renewable energy.
It sounds a little, Donnel, and you and I have talked about this before, this idea of climate justice is economic justice, it's societal justice, it's giving people power and giving people power across all areas, and people oftentimes who don't have access to that power in the past. How does that kind of square with what you do every day at BlocPower?
Yeah, we want to make the stuff better and faster and cheaper and higher quality for customers. I'm talking to you on my iPhone, right? I'm old enough to remember giant PC in my elementary school and public school in Brooklyn. And now we've got computing power that dwarfs that giant computer that's, thinner than a credit card you can put in your pocket, and almost everybody can afford one, right? For $200 or less. What are things going to look and feel like as energy continues to get democratized by products that become smaller and more modular and more accessible? And as energy moves away from being this industry where it's produced far out there by the utility company and they're burning coal, God forbid, or gas, or it becomes smaller and more accessible and nearer to your home. It's on your roof, as Jonathan said, or you've got an anaerobic digester plant on your block, or you've got geothermal. And so you're producing in your own energy that you're consuming, locally in your building or in your block or in your subdivision. That is going to have a dramatic impact, and we just got to make sure that stuff is that it's literally better and more accessible than the fossil fuel alternatives. So that's one part of it. But part of that, and I know Jonathan is an expert at this, and Adam, we've all experienced this as homeowners, as people who have families, dealing with local construction companies. Sometimes it's hard to find the right trusted advisor and partner who's going to come into your building, your home, your most sacred, your location, your largest source of wealth for many people, or savings is their home. Or you may have a church or a synagogue or a school or a mosque. These are sacred locations, these buildings, and you have a contractor come in and you got to trust them to give you the right recommendation. And sometimes that recommendation comes from the fossil fuel industry, right? And they'll say, look, you're better off going with a gas system here. We don't know about, solar. We're not familiar with it. We don't know about, all electric heating systems and hot water. Like, we don't understand that stuff. We want you to stick with fossil fuels. And so how do you get down to that last mile? Maybe it's a question for Jonathan, for me, how do we work with contractors across America to get them trained and educated on some of the newer technologies. So as they're advising homeowners and building owners across the country, that they're giving them great advice that renewable energy is better and healthier and affordable for everybody to access.
Oh, I have so many comments on all of this. A few things. One, I agree with what you said about the trades. I think there is going to be this huge resurgence in the trades. The trades, these are good paying jobs, skilled jobs. There's such a demand. In fact, every contractor I know has never been busier than they are right now. Who knows? Maybe it's because when people were locked up during quarantine, they realized they really don't like their space, or maybe they don't like their family. I don't know. They need space. If people are looking to get into good paying careers and do meaningful work, there's nothing more valuable than the trades. And so I think that's an important part of it, and educating the trades. I think it's so important that not only do we focus on education and showing people where there are really good paying jobs, but also giving them the education about what the new products are that exist out there. There's an organization in Kentucky that was retraining former coal miners into renewable energy jobs, because I do not believe that we need to vilify people who worked in fossil fuel jobs. We wouldn't have the society, the industrial revolution where we are today if it wasn't for the industrial revolution and our fossil fuel and our coal miners. But we now have a better way. We have a better way that's better with human health. We have a better way as far as creating these great jobs. So education is key. And then going back to, Donnel, what you were saying about distributed generation, we also need to rethink how we deliver our energy. Going from one source to power a whole city and all the things that can happen to that source along the way, power outages, downed lines, weather problems, rolling blackouts because, we don't have a smart grid that can balance itself in high demand. These things are a problem as well. So distributed generation, it's not something where, it should be us versus them with utilities. There's going to be more than enough demand for everybody. With EVs now being a staple part of the home, moving to heat pumps instead of fossil fuel furnaces, all of these things will create more electrical demand. So there will be tons of jobs for utility workers, tons of jobs for rooftop solar workers, storage and whatnot. But a lot of it's going to come down to rethinking how we build our homes and service our homes. I think it will become totally common where you're buying a house, you pick your paint colors, you pick your appliances, you get your hot water heater, and you also pick your solar and storage. These are going to be key things to make sure that we can prevent ourselves from having blackouts.
I'm curious from both of your perspectives. You both work with so-called real people. Is this even a discussion when you get into a new home, Jonathan, with family, or Donnel, when you get into a building? Do real people these days need to be convinced that this is the right way to go?
Well, and I work with not even just so-called real people. I work with real people. So yeah, it's the biggest thing right now, and Donnel touched on it earlier, is cost. When I work with families that are trying to figure out how they can because my philosophy is your home should make your life easier. So all of the things that they need, maybe it's, their kitchen, maybe it's the laundry suite, whatever it is, The challenge is right now, renewable energy and some of those really eco-forward solutions are pricey, but with demand, generally you'll see the costs come down on that. So that's why finding out a way that we can afford to pay for these things, finance these things, make them an easy, low lift effort is going to be important, but also making sure that we tackle the equity issue too. It used to be said that, solar is just for rich white people or, hippie fanatics who really want to overpay to generate. That is now the cost has come down so far that there is more accessibility, but we need to still go further and make sure that even if someone's in an apartment building where they didn't think they could put solar on their roof and benefit from solar, well, now let's look at community solar. And that's exactly what Donnel's been doing. They've been going in and transforming these buildings for people and for building owners who never thought this would be a possibility. So I think that's important. It's a whole strategy.
There's a whole new industry that I think can be built up. And I just couldn't agree more. I want to go back to what was being said about the construction trades and, coal mining in Appalachia, right? I mean, America was powered to become one of the largest and wealthiest countries in the world by coal, right? And Senator Manchin from West Virginia, he's the 50th Democratic vote in the Senate. He's pushing for bipartisan, partnership on clean energy, regardless of what you think about what he's doing or not doing. He's a fervent advocate that we got to go in and almost provide like a Marshall Plan for the Appalachian parts of America that powered this country for decades and decades and decades and were of great service to our economy as we were growing and becoming the global power that we are. And I think there's something to be said there. There's a group of cities and states, that are developing a Marshall Plan. So folks may not remember the Marshall Plan is what the U.S. government did in Europe to rebuild Europe after World War II. We basically invested, a ton of money, including in Germany, to like rebuild Europe and get the economy and get the private sector moving again. It was a huge, massive investment, and so some folks are calling for a similar size investment in the Appalachian parts of our country to move them from fossil fuels to the new green energy economy that is the future and is here, ready or not. So the question is, how do we engage different parts of our country and our economy and our workforce in this new economic model? And part of that is going to be retraining and rehiring existing workers on the new technology. I mean, I was just at Mitsubishi, one of our manufacturing partners. They got some amazing new technology that they're about to announce. They made me sign in blood, but a lot of it, hint, is, using CO2 as a refrigerant, right? And so now you're taking the thing that's the most important source of pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, and now you're turning it into a refrigerant that can actually power hyper efficient clean energy technologies that we would put in buildings. And where are the jobs? Manufacturing that, installing that, servicing it, and maintaining it over time. Those should be good American jobs that we can train some of those ex-coal miners to work on, and they can make six figures and make a good living. So I just think that's incredibly important. And as we do all of that we bring down those costs. And I guess the last thing I'd say, Adam, is, a lot of the buildings that we work on, we'll talk to a building manager, and he's not a sustainability guy. He's just like a building manager, and he'll manage a 80-unit apartment building in the Bronx. And the reason when we talk to him about heat pumps, he loves it because he's got 10 apartment units where they're always too hot, they're always too cold, and there's an 80-year-old grandma who's there 24 hours a day in these apartments calling to complain that it's too hot or too cold. And he's got to be responsive, and he's driving back and forth to the building to turn the heat up or turn the air conditioning down or whatever it is. But with these modern clean energy systems, not only are they more sustainable, but you can operate them from your iPhone. I mean, they're modern, right? And so they're just better, and they make people more comfortable. They make people healthier. They reduce the amount of indoor air pollution and asthma. these are just better systems. And so, you don't have to talk to people about climate change and greenhouse gases in order to get them to use some of these better systems. You can say, look, this is going to improve the health of you and your family. It's going to reduce your kids' chronic asthma attacks. It's going to make grandma more comfortable in that back room that always seems to be too cold or too hot. So there's a lot of benefits that we can share with customers. And when we talk to them about these new technologies, that's what we talk about, because that's what they care about.
Jonathan, in your documentary, you made a point of kind of showcasing the equity issue, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier here about how the old thought was solar is just for kind of the rich white people. How does that steer kind of the work that you're doing, this concept of equity?
Well, there definitely is an issue right now, and the problem is more. I think the fossil fuel companies had jumped on the bandwagon of making the equity issue a focal point of some of their campaigns, and I can tell you that there have been strides that have been made in bringing those costs down and making sure there's more accessibility to the technology. But I remember at the documentary, I had a lot of people on social media say, solar is a farce. There's no way. I tried, I looked into it, and it didn't make sense. It was too expensive for me. And I said to them, you're right, because right now, depending on where you are, what state you're in, the cost could be 2, 3, 4 times what the payback cost would be in another state. And so to sort of break it down and make it a little easier to digest, we usually call it the payback period. How long will it take when you pay to put in this solar and storage system? How many years will it take in your state to pay that back? So, and that's sort of how we equate it. Well, there are some places where, you can pay back in as quick as 4 or 5 years, some even as low as 3. There are other states where it's 20, 25 more. It wouldn't make sense. So that's the issue I have, is there are so many complexities in the fixed costs of buying the system, the permitting process. So those are more of the soft costs and all the hoops you have to go through. Even for my own system in Nevada, I remember it was actually pretty easy to get the system put together and to put it in. And then it took months and months and months before the utility would just allow me to flick the switch and start producing my own solar. And they didn't want to, lose the energy that I was paying them for. And so once I did that, it was only a matter of months past beyond that, when the system was up, that the utility then managed to convince the Public Utilities Commission to kill net metering in Nevada. And that's when all of a sudden, all these solar companies went out of business. Everybody was chaotic. People who had invested in these systems now were sitting there wondering, am I even going to be able to get the payback out of the system? And because of that outrage, the governor ended up actually fired the PUC members, changed the PUC members, reversed that legislation, and realized that it wasn't just solar customers who were irate that this had happened. It was everybody else as well, because it's almost like, if your neighbor's house gets broken into, you're not like, oh, great, my house didn't get broken into, I'm so happy. You're still pissed that your neighbor's house got broken into. You want your neighbor to be taken care of. So it's the same thing. We're seeing collectively more and more people saying, together, we need to work together to make sure that everybody can afford solar, renewable energy, heat pump technology, whatever the technology is going to be to electrify the home. And there are really, really big companies, great companies that are working together to try and make sure that happens. And the only way it can happen is if it is approached at not only the consumer products level, but also at the federal level. We need to make sure that we're working with programs that will help incentivize and simplify those incentives across the country.
Donnel, how important is it then for folks like, so it's not just a homeowner to homeowner, but it's more corporate America? I mean, I've heard you talk about this, that kind of the corporate impact on this issue can be significant, can be substantial.
Yeah, let me try to drill down a little bit further into the connectivity point that Jonathan is talking about and bring it back to corporate America here. What are we talking about here? One of my first projects in 2014 was a school in the Bronx. All the kindergartners had chronic asthma, right? And we couldn't figure out why. The principal couldn't figure out why. But the school nurse, she has like 70 different Ziploc bags. Each Ziploc bag has a different inhaler for a different 4-year-old or 5-year-old. And they've got like a little piece of masking tape on it with the kid's name on it. So when one of them has an asthma attack, she knows which inhaler to hand to which kid, right? And the school nurse is pulling her hair out. And it turns out that they've got like a 40-year-old oil burning system boiler furnace, right, in the basement. And Jonathan, what's happening, you probably can explain this better than me. They're burning the oil in the basement. It's emitting indoor air pollution, but their ventilation system, for some reason, was sucking the pollution from the basement. And instead of sending it outdoors, it was sending it into the school cafeteria, right? And we figured this out because we put some air quality sensors throughout the school. And we started to track information that there's a high amount of particulate matter, pollution that was being sucked into the building's filtration system and being pumped into the school cafeteria. And so after lunch every day, there'd be a ton of asthma attacks, right? Because the kids would go into the cafeteria, they breathe in the pollution, and then they'd have asthma attacks. And so the school called us in because a kid died, right? I mean, one of the kids had an asthma attack. They called the parents to come pick him up. The parents came over, they picked him up there on the way to the hospital, and he died. And so now, right, you've got a dead kid. You've got all of his classmates who are incredibly traumatized and horrified because one of their classmates died, and they have asthma. Nobody knows why. And it turns out that it's the building that's making them sick on a daily basis. By the way, as New Yorkers and neighbors, we're all concerned about how horrible this all is, but we're also paying for it, right? Because every time one of those kids goes to the emergency room, it's public health costs that are being paid for through New York City tax dollars. So we're like subsidizing this horrible system that we're all paying for when it's better and it's cheaper to make that building green and healthy. And all we have to do is sit that principle down and say, look, there's a better way. You don't have to have a 50-year-old boiler that's burning oil in your basement and spewing pollution everywhere into all the kids' classrooms. Like, we can put in an all electric heat pump system and it's going to be healthier. And if there's air pollution that comes in the windows from the highway, we're going to filter that air and clean it and put it back into the classroom. And oh, by the way, if the classroom on the third floor gets too hot, the teacher can just alter the temperature in that classroom, or she can do it from her iPhone. It's just better, right? And so as Americans, none of us want any school in our neighborhood to have these kinds of tragedies happen to kids, but this is where we are. And so we have to upgrade the country's energy infrastructure and building infrastructure and water infrastructure. I like some of the stuff that the White House has proposed in the jobs plan. I like some of the stuff that Republicans have proposed in the infrastructure plan as well. And I think if we can kind of come together to find common ground on upgrading our nation's infrastructure, the benefit is that it's like all the kids in our country that we're investing in their health, we're investing in their future, we're investing in their environment. That's where we need to be. Corporations are going to want to get down on this and be a part of this, right? I mean, we were just on the phone with Apple. We're talking to Starbucks. They have customers, they have employees who care deeply about these issues, and they want to get deeply engaged in helping to solve these problems. And oh, by the way, there's a bunch of tax credits. There's financial returns when you invest in green infrastructure. I mean, Goldman Sachs didn't invest in a green infrastructure credit agreement and strategic partnership with BlocPower because they think we're the greatest thing. They did it because they're going to make money and they're going to get a bunch of tax credits. And oh, by the way, they get to save the environment in green inner city buildings and reduce air pollution and improve kids' health. And so it's a good strategy for corporate America who want to be leaders on sustainable initiatives and who want to be leaders in diversity, equity, and inclusion. We think that partnering to green buildings in financially underserved communities, whether that's rural America or urban America, this is a great thing for a corporation to do, and you'll get a bunch of great PR out of it as well.
So, go ahead, Jonathan, please.
Yeah, I was going to say it's funny because all the misnomers of, before, all the misinformation about, you should be for, renewable energy because you support this political agenda, and you should be for this. All of that, it doesn't really make sense. If you took all of the politics out of it and just looked at the benefits, bringing your costs down, making money. There's a lot of people who are actually making money on their solar systems, cleaning up making it healthier for our kids to read. Nobody's going to argue that stuff. That's great stuff. Creating thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs. Nobody's going to argue that stuff. The the real thing that struck me, I think, when I started researching the film was that if you look at, I think it's something like over 95% of the fossil fuel burning dirty power plants in the country are in close proximity to low income or communities of color. And the reason is these communities don't have the political or financial means to fight back and say, this is wrong, you're killing us, this is not, healthy for the environment or for human health. And that to me is just a real red flag, when it's almost as though some of these entities are, prioritizing their legal costs or their legal battles over the health of the community. And that's just not right. So I like that now big companies are standing up, even utilities. There are many utilities that are standing up and saying, we're making a commitment to move in this direction because it's right. I just want to make sure that they're not taking away the rights of people to also diversify with their own rooftop generation or storage.
Yeah. I'll just build on that a little bit quickly as well. Like, I'm in Georgia. I went to visit my mom, and I had a meeting with the CEO of Mitsubishi, who's an amazing manufacturer of many of the products that we need to decarbonize buildings across America. And it reminded me, I got down in Georgia, and there was like a Sierra Club Tea Party coalition down here, Jonathan. I don't know if you heard about it. Adam, I don't know if you heard about it either. The Tea Party and the Sierra Club got together about solar, because there was like a law in Georgia that if you had solar panels on the roof, if the utility didn't own them, then if you own only a utility company could own solar panels because they produce electricity and should be regulated that way. And so both people in the Tea Party and in the Sierra Club got together and joined forces and were like, this is a ridiculous law. If we want solar panels, like, we should be able to have, this is America. If we want solar panels on our home, we should be able to access that. And so you saw people from both sides of the aisle come together in Georgia and work together to figure out how to increase access to solar panels in the state of Georgia. And they were very successful. And that's what we need. I couldn't agree with Jonathan more.
When you take it's interesting, you talked, Jonathan, about taking the politics out of this. I mean, we've reached out. We have something called the Youth Climate Collaborative that we've been running, where we've been getting advice from young people on this topic, and listening more than speaking, at least in the early parts of this. And with the younger generations, we can all take heart, right? I mean, like, this isn't even an issue with generations younger than all of us. I mean, so whether this gets changed now or we wait, and I think what you all are saying is we might as well just change it now, because, but I think we could all agree, right, that this change is coming, because the younger generations aren't going to stand for this.
Yeah, I mean, there are two things that I don't think the younger generations want to see at all. One is us, in our 40s plus, making TikTok dance videos. They don't want to see that. Ridiculous. The other is us making policy decisions that shackle future generations to dirty energy, and which will cost the economy more. There is no doubt about it. If we don't start to aggressively transition to clean energy, the costs will become unbearable, not only in direct climate change costs, but also in just the human health aspects of our healthcare costs. So yeah, I think it's very important that we look. The UN, was saying that what is there 1.2 billion people between the ages of 15 and 24 on the planet. And when you look at, how they're looking for a better way, a better future, most of them are supporting this dive into renewable energy. The one thing that I always caution people is, there are some people that you'll talk to who are pro renewable energy, and they say, we have to flick a switch today, no more fossil fuel, it's all renewable energy, and that's that immediately. It's physically impossible. We would not be able to do that. Not only would our economies crumble, but also we don't have the infrastructure or the supply chain yet to make that happen. However, we can find very reasonable, very realistic targets to achieve those goals that also bolster the economy. In reality, America should be the leader internationally and show everyone how it's done. So I love the fact that not only coming from the White House, but coming from a lot of these major corporations, they're looking at ways that they can domestically produce these products, create millions of jobs, and also bolster the community, so that by the time those 15 to 24-year-olds are our age, they've got a strong economy, they've got a healthier planet, and all of these decisions they did pay off.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that's 100% right. I mean, I do take exception. I mean, I fully intend to do TikTok dances with my 40-year-old self and my 5-year-old. I think that's an important part of our strategy at BlocPower. So you'll learn more about that as we launch it. But I think that, we do need to be making massive investments to kind of lay the groundwork, right, for clean energy at scale. And yeah, like this generation has crossed the Rubicon. I think in terms of racial relations, I think in terms of gender equality and recognition of different identities and just the way that they're thinking about inclusivity, as well as climate. In many ways, it's going to just be the most awesome generation of humans ever produced. I think the challenge for us, how can we help them to make the necessary clean energy investments over the next 10 years that the United Nations says will be required in order to preserve the future habitability of America and the rest of the planet? And what are the things that we can be doing? And I think, we're trying to do a lot of it, and we're making good progress.
So Donnel, you've heard me say this, and Jonathan, for your purposes, both my parents were educators. My wife's a teacher. I'm always about a call to action, a takeaway here. And Donnel and Jonathan, I want to ask you both, kind of for folks who are listening to this, what can we individually do to advance this reality that folks who are listening to this, who believe in kind of the conversation we're having here today, how do we individually move it forward? Donnel, let me start with you.
Well, I want to move your building off of fossil fuels. I'm in the business of figuring out how to decarbonize your home. And so if you're somebody that's concerned about climate change, or you're like me, you're alarmed. I am effing alarmed about climate change and the speed of it. Because I have a 5-year-old and I want him to live in a totally habitable planet by the time he's 40. I think that there's a lot of things that we need to do. So personally, we'd love it if you went to BlocPower.io. We have a quiz that you can take for 10 minutes on your home or your school, or your kid's school, or your church or synagogue or your mosque. 10-minute questionnaire about your building, and we have an algorithm, and we'll basically tell you for free the kinds of things you can do to decarbonize your home or your school or your place of worship or community center. And even if you can't do it right now, at least you'll have a plan and understand that it's possible to move that building off of fossil fuels and save money and make it healthier and more comfortable. And so we want you to fill out that quiz. So that would be my request.
Jonathan?
I think the biggest thing is be willing to have a conversation, even if it's a difficult conversation, with friends and family about energy and about, how we're trying to decarbonize the home. It doesn't have to be something where you put up a brick wall, or that people get, their back up because they feel that, maybe this is some sort of political agenda. It's not. Everything in the home is moving toward, smarter homes, more efficient homes, and how we power our homes. If anyone has seen my documentary Power Trip, I created a website that just has a flow through to a lot of the places where you can get information about solar in your area. So if you go to powertriptruth.com, but most importantly, I think if you have a device at home that is a fossil fuel burning device, whether it's a furnace, a gas range, something like that, a hot water heater, if it's time for you to replace that appliance, at that moment, I think you need to consider a non-fossil fuel, more efficient appliance, because the technology is already there. You can do a lot more. You can bring your costs down. And as Donnel was saying, most of these appliances you can monitor through an app as well, which is pretty cool. So some of those steps are really easy, low lift. Some of them are using your voice to make sure legislation is passed that does support communities and family and bringing the cost down and keeping these jobs in America. So depending on how much time and effort you want to put into it, there's a lot you can do. I think people would be amazed at how powerful their voice is when they want to speak up about these things. Even when you call your senator's office and you say, this is something that's very important to me, they log every single one of those calls and what you called about. Same with your emails. And they do use that to decide what they're going to get behind and what they're going to support. So I say the only thing that is more powerful than your voice is if you get together with a friend or a family member, and then there's 2 voices, and then there's 5 voices, and then there's companies and movements that are getting behind it too.
Jonathan, Scott, Donnel Baird, thank you both so much. I appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good to see you. Adam, good to see you. This is great. Thanks.